before we start off going into the information itself, I'd like to share 3 stories with you that talk about culture. The first is, there is an organization that has already been implementing conscious culture for a few years. When I say a few, I mean like 2 years. And there is this team whose responsibility it is to help implement the culture in their organization. And the organization that they're dealing with is about 8,000 people. What's interesting about this team, as I have worked with them and observed them, is that the leaders know how to talk about conscious culture. They can tell you everything that you're about to see in this presentation. However, when the people on the team work with their managers, they do not experience the behaviors that are in line with this culture. They get behaviors that are not conscious. And it's a really interesting dynamic about a team who's leading the conscious culture rollout in a company that's promoting it, and yet the struggle and the challenge of seeing it in play. The reason that I mention this is because the reality is, it's important to be realistic with our expectations and to understand that it's easier to hear information and learn information and more challenging to put that information into practice. So as we go through this together, this journey of understanding, I really would like for you to ask your questions and thinking about how you would implement a conscious culture. The second story is taking place in another organization where they are starting to think about the importance of culture in their organization. And part of the reason that they are thinking about it is because of these 2 stories. The first story is about a team, an engineering team, and the manager of the team, her name is Allie. And about 20 engineers report to Allie today. These people love working on her team. They get up every day and they look forward to coming to work, and they love working together and they love supporting each other. In the company, this is known as the go-to team. If you want to get a problem solved in the company, you go to Allie's team. If you're having a question or a challenge or you want to learn something new, you go to Allie's team. What's interesting about Allie's team is that the engineers on her team are not the brightest engineers in the company. They're not the best engineers in the company, but they are the go-to team. There's another team, and it's run by another manager called Sam. He's also an engineering leader. It's a partner team to Allie's team. And Sam is a brilliant engineer. He's a brilliant person in general. I'm very impressed with him in terms of his knowledge, his understanding, his expertise, his ability to solve problems, his ability to think from a technical perspective in a big picture way. However, the culture and the dynamics on Sam's team is very different than Allie's team. Sam only hires the best and the brightest engineers. If you didn't go to Stanford or MIT or Rutgers or top engineering schools, you won't get into Sam's team. Sam's team is known as the brain team. These are the people that have the most knowledge, the highest salaries. It's a very coveted position, or it has been, to be on Sam's team. However, people don't like going to Sam's team unless they have no other choice. If nobody else can solve the problems in the organization, then they'll go to Sam's team. Otherwise, people avoid going to the team because they have a reputation of being unhelpful, snobby, elitist, and people don't enjoy that experience. So we decided that we wanted to run an investigation on understanding what is the culture of those 2 teams. And so we asked them a couple of questions. We asked each person on the team Do you feel trusted on the team? Do you feel valued on the team? Do you trust your teammates? Do you feel that this team has your back, supports you, will cover for you if you need it? Do you feel that you get to use your strengths, the things that are special, unique, your skills that you love? That's what a strength is. Do you get to use them every day at work? And lastly, would you invite your best friend to work on this team? I will tell you that the results were fascinating. Pretty much, I say completely, everybody on Allie's team answered yes, 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 yes to all of these questions. However, pretty much everybody, and I mean about 98% of everybody on Sam's team, could not answer all of these in the positive. And actually what we did was we did a 5-point scale for them. And so everybody on Allie's team was a 4 or 5, and everybody on Sam's team was below a 3. So we said, okay, so we the best and the brightest, the highest IQ, the most intelligence, the dream team, the brain team is not the brain team is not the dream team. And when we talk about the stakeholders, the people who come to this team for help, or the customers who want help from one of the engineering teams, always go to Allie's team and not the team with more knowledge. When we asked in interviews about the last question, we also had very interesting responses. On Sam's team, the answer was, I would not want my best friend because I don't want to have to compete with my best friend. The answer on Allie's team was, I absolutely want my best friend because I know that I'll make my best friend better and my best friend will help me be better. Really interesting. So we decided we wanted to take the experiment to another level. And we moved 2 of Allie's top engineers to Sam's team and 2 of Sam's engineers onto Allie's team. And the idea was a 3-month rotation. So after 3 months, they would swap back into their previous teams. What we discovered was about 2 months into it, the 2 engineers who went from Allie's team to Sam's team quit and went and found other jobs outside of the company. And in their exit interviews, we found out that they could not handle the competitiveness. It's not that they couldn't match up. Technically, they were really bright. It was that they didn't enjoy the culture. They did not enjoy the experience of working on that team where nobody had their back, where they did not trust their teammates. They got to use their strengths and their skills every day. They were valued and for what they brought, but the team relationship was not good. And the relationship with Tam, he only promoted this competitiveness. On the other hand, the 2 engineers that went from Sam's team to Allie's team had a different experience. For about the first 5 weeks or so, they were standoffish. They kept themselves separate from everybody else. They attended the team meetings, but they didn't really participate. They didn't share their knowledge, and they didn't participate in the team events. They actually watched from the side, and in speaking to them throughout that 5 weeks, they didn't trust what they were seeing. They didn't believe that these people were being honest and sincere. They thought that these people really were playing a game with them and that this was just a test to see if they would eventually make fools of themselves and lose their esteemed position of being the smartest and the brightest. Something happened, and I'm not really completely sure what. I think maybe it was just time that they started to participate a little bit more on the team. And 2 months in, I met with them again, and they were fully integrated in the team. They loved being on the team. Their trust for the team went completely to the high. I asked them those questions again about, the ones that I showed you before, and they scored 5 on all of them. And they loved being there. And they said to me, I don't want to go back to Sam's team. Is there any way that you can protect us so that we don't have to go back to Sam's team? We love being on Allie's team. It was an amazing testament to what the culture of the team was, not being the brightest and the best. Oh, the other thing that they said was They felt that they had improved and grown in their skills more in the 4 weeks since I had last talked to them than they had in the previous 2 years on Sam's team. On Sam's team, they had to grow and learn. They had to do education stuff, but they grew more in those 4 weeks on Allie's team with the teamship going on than they felt that they had grown before. It was pretty amazing. If we look at the data, and this is just some of the stats that I copied from the internet, there is tons of data that show us how important culture is to business results. And I'm not going to read all of the data, all of the things that are here. Clever is going to share my slides with you afterwards. And you can easily Google this. There is tons of data that shows just how much of a competitive advantage companies get when they have a strong, intentional, and even better, a conscious culture. It improves results, it improves engagement. One of the challenges that companies are having today is the fight for the best talent, they call it, for the best and the brightest. And employees, new employees are caring about culture as a reason for choosing where they're going to go next in their career. You see that the research by Harvard Business Review talks about revenues being 4.1 times higher in companies that have an intentional culture. So there's a pretty good reason for it. Beyond the personal examples that I've shared with you, we're seeing it as an industry reason. However, there's this challenge that we face. And the challenge is that culture change is a change. And I don't know how much you've all been exposed to change management. Anytime that we're making a change, we're going to encounter resistance to change. Sometimes it's because people fear change. They fear the unknown of change. Sometimes people like the status quo. They like the position that they have. They don't want to change. And so while the survey dates that I have on this slide are a little bit old, even the information that I've continued to curate to find indicates that it's hard. And when I consult with companies, I encounter a lot of resistance to change, to even positive culture change. And we're going to go through this session, and I'm going to highlight many of the reasons why there is resistance to that change. And it's mostly, not to keep it a secret, it's mostly because culture change is done inconsistently in a company. And when it's inconsistent, then our dishonesty monitors kind of blink and flash to let us know that something doesn't seem right here. And we can sense that, and therefore we don't trust what we're seeing. So what is a conscious culture? The way that a lot of people talk to me about it is it's how they feel about coming to work. That feeling about coming to work. Just stop for a second and think about going to work on Monday morning. Does it bring a warm feeling to your heart? Or do you feel, oh my God, I can't believe I got to go back to work on Monday morning? That feeling about how we think about work tells us a lot about the culture of our team and of the organization that we work in. And when we are having a conscious culture, whether it's happening only on our teams or it's happening in the larger organizations, we feel at least okay, if not excited and happy about going back to work on Monday morning. Not that we don't want our weekends and love our weekends, but that feeling is different. So what are the basic building blocks of a conscious culture? They start with three things. One is self-awareness, and that is me being aware of what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling it. It's a baseline for a larger scale of skills called emotional intelligence skills. And emotional intelligence skills, in its simple form, is what triggers me, why does it trigger me, and how do I behave when I'm triggered? And finally, how do I react to others in that triggered state? When I can understand what triggers me and how I respond to that internally and externally, I can get much more control over my behaviors and my actions that therefore influence my relationships and my interactions. Lastly, bias awareness. From the time that we are little kids, we start to form our biases, and it happens innocently. It happens from the influences of our parents and our siblings and our family. And then it goes on to the larger group of people that we get to meet, our friends, our schools, radio and television and movies. And they all are teaching us how to navigate our world, what we trust, what we don't trust, what's safe, what's not safe, what's good, what's bad. We take on this information innocently without looking at it in depth. We hear other people's opinions and we make them our own without understanding why they have those opinions or what they really mean by those opinions. When we want to operate in a conscious culture or an intentional culture, we need to be aware of how we judge our world and how we judge those around us. Because without that, we can't be having healthy interactions. We can't be having honest, intentional, conscious, self-aware interactions. And so the awareness of ourselves, being aware of our triggers and our behaviors and our emotions, and being aware of our belief systems of good and bad judgment systems are all critical for us to be able to live and act effectively in a conscious culture. Now, we've already talked about a little bit of this, the benefits of a conscious culture, and I just want to double click on it a little bit. First of all, there's psychological safety, and you can look and do a lot of Google searches on psychological safety. It is the foundation for any healthy relationship. It is the basis for trust, for a willingness to go above and beyond for another person, to help another person. And what we see, like if we look at Allie's and Sam's team, Allie's team had a lot of psychological safety, and Sam's team had none, or practically none. The employee engagement, how we interact with each other, how we trust each other. When I have psychological safety and good engagement, I am more productive. I'm also more innovative. That means that I think about how to solve problems even when I'm not faced with a problem. I think more creatively. I want to go above and beyond to do more for the company, to do more for my customers, to do more for my coworkers. And when you have that, obviously the companies are going to do better, your team's going to do better, and you're going to enjoy coming to work much more. So the benefits are just astronomical. What does it take? The foundational building blocks of what does it take in a culture to do this? All right, we already talked about what it takes as an individual, right? Those three things, the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence, and the bias awareness. That's the individual. This is at a company level. It means that employees have a growth mindset. And we're going to talk a little more about each of these in a second. The second is that we have common or shared values or principles. Every culture that is a culture has these in some way. They may be healthy values or they may be unhealthy values, but they're shared, they're common in that culture. The next is that we have shared rituals or shared processes, shared behaviors. We have different, or customs, we might think of them as well, that we do together that bring us closer together. And in any culture, and I know that the Latin American culture is very rich with a lot of rituals. And so I think that you guys understand how powerful a ritual can be. And then lastly, certainly within the corporate environment, is strategic alignment. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these. A growth mindset. So the term was somewhat coined by a Stanford professor many years ago. Her name is Kairós DS, and she wrote a book called Mindsets, where she talks about growth mindsets and fixed mindsets. And all of us don't have one or the other. We have both. And we have fixed mindsets about certain things in our lives, and we have growth mindset about other things in our lives. And the understanding of where we are approaching things with what mindset helps us understand how we are acting and reacting to those events. So some behaviors of attitudes, reactions of a growth mindset are, we look at challenges as opportunities. We look at failures as fuel, as you know, the fuel for learning. We look at our individualness, our idiosyncrasies as strengths. We are willing to experiment. We focus on solutions and not problems, and we have a desire to learn from others because we recognize that other people are not a threat. So this is, simply put, a can-do attitude versus the fixed mindset, which is, I can't do any better. This is as good as I can get. Identifying common values, there is not one set of right values that works in a conscious culture. It's for the team and for the organization to figure out what are the common values that bring and bind together this organization in a healthy, supportive way. And so the way that we can find that out is by asking these types of questions. What do we want to be known for as a team or an organization? What legacy do we want to create? Meaning, what's the brand we want to have? What impact do we want to have on others or the world? And what do we want people to be saying about us? Once again, kind of another way of looking at the brand. When we understand what if we say that we want people to trust us, then a common value is trust. If we say we want people to believe in us, then we have to figure out what are the values that bring about belief in each other. A lot of it comes down to trust. And so values could be like giving your ego a day off, giving your best, going above and beyond, winning together are common values that we see in conscious cultures. And then when we look at rituals, how do we determine shared rituals that we want to use that will make us stronger together? We ask ourselves, how do we want to recognize and reward and celebrate success in the company? We're going to talk a lot more about this a little bit later, but the idea of understanding how we want to recognize success, how we recognize success, how we celebrate success goes a long way to the rituals. Because if we celebrate people that are like in Ali's team, then those become the rituals. If we recognize and reward people in Sam's team, then those become the rituals. The same thing about heroes. We decide who's the hero in a company. And when we know who those heroes are the people that the company rituals and culture goes to, regardless if they don't match up to the company values, to the cultural values that we've set. And then lastly, we need to have a set purpose, a why for the company, a vision for the company is another name for a purpose, and a mission, how we're going to get there. And we need to ensure that the purpose and the mission align to the values and the rituals that we've set for the conscious culture. We're going to talk all more of these. These are the what. We're going to talk about the how and implementation after we have some Q&A. So Kleber, any questions coming in?
Yes, there is some questions prepared for this section. Thank you so much for the first half of your presentation. So let's start with the first one. How can I influence my company culture if I'm not a leader in the organization?
That's a really interesting and a tough thing for people, honestly. Thank you for that. When I don't feel like I am the leader in a company, and how do I influence the culture, there's a couple of things that you can do. The first is that you can start by talking about these things in your teams, about what is a conscious culture, what does it take, what are the mindsets that we have on our team, what are the rituals that we have on our team, do we have them, do we have values, or do we want them? And if you start asking these questions within your team, people will stop and think about it. They might not have answers up front, but as they start to think about it, you will start influencing your team. And in Ali and Sam's example, the company did not have that culture. Ali was doing that, and it influenced the whole company.
That's great. The second one is, what is the first thing I should do to start make the difference today in my company? That's good. Huh?
Thank you. So it's once again, those things that we already just talked about in the last one, more importantly is for you to be thinking about this for yourself, right? We started talking about the first thing was self-awareness, bias awareness, and emotional intelligence. So how well do you know yourself? How well do you understand what triggers you emotionally? How well do you understand what your biases are? The first thing that you can do is focus on that and learn more about yourself, and then start to share that with people that you trust in your team.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. Do these culture elements apply when wanting to create a culture at home too?
So, you know, it's really interesting. My wife was just talking about that when I was preparing for this. And she was saying how all of them, other than strategic alignment, purpose, and mission, very much apply at home, right? At home, how often do we say to our spouse, our partners, our kids, or how often do our kids say, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. I don't know how to do that, right? And very much to think about what are the mindsets that we have at home. The same thing with our values. What are the value systems that we have at home? Do we value honesty? Do we value trusting each other? Do we value helping each other out, supporting each other? And what are the rituals? Do we have shared meals together? Do we do shared things together? All of the things that we do as a unit, as a family unit, will bring us closer together. So absolutely. The question of, do we have a shared purpose? Some families, funny enough, I have met families with a shared purpose and a mission in the world. I don't personally have that in my family, per se, in that way stated. However, I think it's definitely something that a lot of it does apply at home as well. Thanks, Clever.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I have two kids. They are very different, and I think that we must build up some rituals in family so we can grow this culture together. There is another question here. What happens if different teams have values that are aggressive and don't seem to create harmony among the company?
So I think that probably came from the example with Sam. Sam's team, that was Sam's team. And what ends up happening is that's what the behavior becomes in teams. And unfortunately, it would be nice if culture happened naturally everywhere. And it is happening, but it's not happening consciously. So I would say that it would be nice if conscious culture happened everywhere. If we always approached each other with the best of intent in mind for the other person, not just for myself. In Sam's team, it was all about a win-win attitude, but the win-win was all for one, and all, you know, I'm all in for me. I'm not all in for the team. And so we will tend to do that if that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So the last question, so we can go to the second half of your presentation. It's how important is to get the values, rituals, company purpose, and mission perfect. And what do you mean about perfect at all?
Right. So I would say there's no way to get them perfect. Right. There is no perfect culture. There is no perfect set of values or rituals. There's no perfect mission or vision for a company. The idea is that it's one that you and your team or your organization feel will move you forward in a positive, healthy way. There has been a lot of companies that have been doing this for a number of years, Cisco, Microsoft, Google, and some other companies, and their vision, their values or principles and rituals have shifted over the years. They haven't just kept them. They are constantly looking about what's going on in the world around them and reassessing what they need to be their best in this environment, not in the environment that was yesterday. So there is no perfect answer. It's a matter of looking at it afresh at least once a year and saying, does the things that we said a year ago still work for us today? Are they bringing us the results we were looking for?
Well, that's really nice. I was once on Capgemini, and they made a huge effort to impose the shared values. They communicate frequently, often, and massively about the 7 values the company has. So that's a great talk. But they don't try to get this perfectly. So they
right.
This is what we want. We are building, adapting at least these 7 values we have to impose in the company. That was great. Can we follow? How can we implement those culture? No? How can we set up a set of actions that will help us to build a conscious company? I don't know if you have in your second part of the presentation. So. So how can
Absolutely. So that is the second part. The second part is talking about how do we put this into practice. So I'm going to go on and answer your question over the next 20 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some questions at the end as well. So Kleber, thank you very much. I'm going to encourage everybody to continue to please, thank you for those questions, and to continue to ask questions in the Q&A box that you have on your platform, so that I can help answer questions for you to get that extra depth. So Kleber asked about how do we implement this? So the first is to understand where is our culture today. And I'm going to use this idea of a GPS. So pretty much in our world today, everybody on their smartphone has a GPS, and we use it to navigate and get to the locations that we want to get to. The GPSs are very advanced today. They tell us traffic updates. They tell us sometimes where the police are. They're really great. And understanding the model of a GPS is really helpful in navigating our culture, because like a GPS, if I don't understand where my starting point is, then the GPS cannot give me directions to my desired destination. It needs to know my starting point. And so understanding where we are today is critical for us to make a plan to get to the culture that we want to have. So there are different people who are, masters of culture or company culture, and some of them have 2 stages, some of them have 4 stages. What I've been noticing and working with is 3 stages of the states of a culture. There is the unintentional culture, and this most often is found in startups, where the culture is there, because everywhere there's culture. It's just not been set in any defined intentional way. Then there's an intentional culture, where we've actually started to think about our culture, what we want for that culture, who are the heroes of our culture, and how do we, and are things in line. And then there is the conscious culture, where things are already really aligned and happening, and our focus is keeping it going and reinforcing it. So let's take a little bit more of a look into each of these. The first is the unintentional culture. And as I said, it starts off with that there's not a stated vision or mission. It doesn't mean that there isn't one. It means that it's not been written down officially anywhere, or if it has, it hasn't been widely shared with anybody. Very often this happens in startups, where the vision and the mission is based on the founder of the company, and it's really more about getting something built, a product or a solution done, and it doesn't really come about what is the vision or the mission of the company. Another element, a factor of it, is where we have unexpressed or inconsistent experience of company values. And this is very common when we don't have any work done on what are the shared or common values that we want to have, that we will see that based on who your manager is, or based on who you're interacting with, a very different set of behaviors coming out, and different things are rewarded and valued depending on who you're talking to. There's no consistency, and there's no way to do anything about it. There's no listening strategy. Now, one of the things, right, about that, like going back to the GPS idea, is understanding employee sentiment is critical if I want to make any changes, because otherwise, what am I making a change to? I can make changes at any time, but I'm rarely making intelligent decisions if they're not informed decisions. And so a listening strategy is really about getting what is the pulse, what is the sentiment of the employees today, where are we today, before I can make a move on what I want to change. And so unintentional cultures rarely have a listening strategy. There's a disconnect between the values that we're stating, whatever that value is that a manager is stating, because they're not necessarily common, and the way that we compensate and reward people. And this is one of the biggest derailers that we see in any company ever, and especially as they're trying to implement an intentional culture, is when I reward people for bad behavior. An example of that, and I've seen this in multiple versions, so I'll just use this, what I call more generic example, which is if you've got a person who's a rainmaker in the company, a person who is excellent at bringing in business, or a person who's excellent at making sales, They bring in a lot of business for the company, but they are rude. They are mean to others. They are demeaning. They are hard to work with. And we continue to reward that behavior or reward them or promote them. We are essentially telling the company, this is what a company hero looks like. This is what we want you to emulate because this is who we reward. And so sometimes companies say, I can't help it. I need it. When we make that decision, we are saying to people, that is the culture that we want, like on Sam's team. And we see that when teams come together under a healthy culture, they are actually more productive and produce better results than a single rainmaker with bad behavior. And then lastly is that we don't think about culture when we hire new people into the company. And this is a critical piece because new people have a massive influence. It's subtle at first, but then it becomes very big as they continue to grow into the company. And when we don't look for cultural alignment, we continue to fracture the culture within the company. So if we look at now what's elements or signs of an intentional culture, it's where we've already established a unique vision and mission. And the reason I say unique is because we want to feel that our vision and our mission means something to us. So if I'm a technology company and my vision and mission essentially would work for an ice cream company, then that mission and vision is not so unique, and it won't make me feel unique, and it won't drive the other things that we want out of the culture. The second one about clear communication of vision and mission, you know, I don't know if you've heard this saying, but if a large tree falls in a forest where nobody's around, does the tree make noise when it falls? And the answer is, does it make a difference? Because nobody was around to hear it. So if we have a great vision and a mission for the company, but nobody knows what it is, who cares? And so our ability to communicate it effectively out to our employees so that everybody in the company and our customers know what our vision and our mission is necessary for an intentional culture. Common values that are shared with the employees. Very much, again, that if we have established values at a leadership level, but nobody knows about them, then they're not common, they're not shared. If we want people to rally around something, then we've got to get it known. More than that, if we go back to those earlier questions about that I asked you about how we do it, right? What do we want to be known for? What legacy do we want to have? Why do we want customers to come to us? That should not be decided at the leadership level alone. That should be decided along with the employees. Employees will rarely buy in to vision, to values that are determined by the leadership only. People will buy in better when they are part of the process. Then when we hire new people, we think about culture. Not only are they a technical fit or a professional fit, are they a cultural fit? And then lastly, do our compensation models align? Are we really rewarding the behaviors that we say are important to us? Or are we doing the rainmaker thing? And then lastly, if we look at the elements of a conscious culture, it is around these things, which is that the mission is clearly expressed, and it also ties into how we're going to achieve our vision, our purpose for the company. And so often, I see companies with amazing visions, purpose statements, but the mission doesn't clear about how they plan to make that mission achieve the vision. And when that happens, people feel that disconnect, and they feel that the leadership is disconnected. The values and the mindsets are well defined, and they're tied to the expected behaviors. And the reason we talk about expected behaviors are it's not a prison. It's not a place where there's enforcement. It's about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And you know, in the U.S. right now around social justice, we've seen a lot of this about what is acceptable behaviors and what is not acceptable behaviors. And the idea is to find a place of harmony rather than a place of disharmony. We want a place of respect. And so when I say behaviors, it's at the level of that. Respect one another, treat each other as you would want to be treated. And so those are values that are also tied into behaviors. Managers being trained on the expected behavior and receiving regular feedback. In a conscious culture, we understand that we do not necessarily see our impact on others, and we need the input, we need the response, the feedback. The idea is that in a conscious culture, sometimes feedback is given harsh and with judgment, and it triggers our fight and flight mechanism. In a conscious culture, feedback is given in a healthy way with positive intent. It's given in a way like this, that if I was going to say to Kleber, right, to give him feedback, I would not say, Kleber, this is what you did. I would say, Kleber, when you did this thing, this is how I experienced it. It's not with judgment. It's with sharing that you did this thing, and it could be perfect. This is just how I experienced it. Employees are coached and evaluated on the values. This is what their performance metrics are based on, their work, and their living the values of the company. There is a trusted listening program. Leadership, team leadership, and senior leadership knows the state of the company. They understand where the sentiment is. And they do it on a regular basis, at least once a quarter. Employees understand the company's direction, why they've chosen to do something, and what is going to be required of all of the employees to make that a reality. So often leadership tell people, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, but not how we want to get there and why we're doing this. And without knowing the why, we tend not to always believe in it. And without knowing how, we tend to do things in non-aligned ways. The how is not to be prescriptive. Everyone needs to march like in the army, how. This is more about, this is how we want to align our decision-making, our priority decisions to something. That's what we mean by what's required to get there. When we hire people, culture fit is at least 50% of the decision-making. When we hire new people, we think that they have got to have a culture fit. And then lastly, all of the HR systems, the HRMS systems, the CRM systems, all of the compensation programs are aligned to those things. If they're not, once again, then it would be very clear to everybody that we are not really serious about rewarding the things that we say we value. So hopefully that's clear. If there's any questions about this, please put that in the Q&A chat now, and we'll get to it at the end. All right. So this is the identification piece. And now we're going to spend the next about 10 minutes covering what is the way of actually building it into a process. So we've already covered the GPS. We're going to use the GPS analogy for the first 4 of these. So if we don't know where we are today, the GPS can't give us directions to where we want to go. If we don't know where we want to go, even if we know where we are today, the GPS can't give us directions. If we know where we are today and we know where we want to go, but the volume on the GPS is off, we can't hear the directions. Doesn't really matter that we know that where the directions are there, we still don't know how to follow them. And then lastly, with this analogy, if we know where we are, we know where we want to go, we can hear the directions, but we don't know the rules of the road. We don't know how the other drivers are going to behave. We don't know if they keep to their lanes. We don't know if they drive on the right side or the left side of the street or both. We don't know what red lights mean or green lights mean. We don't know what the signs mean. Then we can know how to go, but we won't necessarily feel safe to go because we don't know the rules of the road. So when we want to implement a culture, we have to know the present state. We have to know where we want to go. We have to be hearing it and communicating it. We have to understand what are the expectations of our behaviors. Once again, we have to be sure that the compensation and incentive models are mirroring and reinforcing that, all of those, the values and the rituals. And lastly, the reinforcement. And the reinforcement is this really interesting human nature problem that we have, which is we can't just brush our teeth once and assume that our teeth will stay healthy for the rest of our lives. We can't go to the gym just once and assume that we are going to keep all that muscle that we burnt in that one and that we created in that one time. Learning doesn't just happen once, and so on and so forth. Everything that we do as human beings needs constant reinforcement, or it atrophies, or it dies, or we lose it. If we don't practice a language, we forget it. And so reinforcement in a culture is necessary for the culture to sustain and to grow. Let's take a little bit of a look in each of these. How do we determine the current state? I've given you some indication of this already. Here's a little bit more detail. It's all about the employee listening, understanding where the employees are, not just where the leaders are, all of the employees. And a great way is focus groups. And focus groups is one of the most powerful ways to understand employee sentiment, because when you do a survey, then employees have to interpret your questions and they answer, and you have to interpret their answers. It's a guessing game, a lot of it. So whoever speaks on the line who is not on mute, please, Marcelo, can you please mute your line, please? Or Clever, can you please mute Marcelo? So focus groups are a way to do a live survey, a way to make sure that the people you're asking questions on can understand what are the questions you're asking, and that you have a way of understanding their answers or checking on their answers. Pulse surveys are regular surveys. The idea of a survey, a pulse survey, is a regular quarterly survey that you put out there that employees answer. In the moment, that survey doesn't necessarily tell you something. The value of a pulse survey is you can see the trend that's happening over multiple quarters or multiple months within a company that give you an indication, is the culture getting stronger and better, or is the culture getting worse? And you don't necessarily know the why for that, but you can definitely get a sentiment of the direction of the culture. The team sentiment is different than focus groups, because the team sentiment is literally on the team, where focus groups are generally you're going to getting a larger group that's not necessarily working together. So that you're getting the input from multiple people, but you also want to know what the team is like. What is in each individual's team? So if you are a team manager or a team leader, how does your team feel? And you can use those questions that I did in the very beginning of the presentation. Does my team have my back? Do I feel valued? And so on and so forth. Why would I invite my best friend to the team? And that will give you a good sentiment. And then lastly, exit interviews are a wonderful source of data, because when people are leaving a company, they are usually very open and honest about why. To plan your future state, a great question to ask is, what is the legacy I want to have? What do I want to be known for in 5 years, in 10 years as a company? And then you say, well, what's the vision that will get us there? Who are the types of people that will get us there? Those are our heroes. What are the goals that we need to achieve that legacy? And the goals are a mixed bag, because we have to be careful about creating goals that bring meaningful results. Some companies say that our goal is to make money. When we make that our goal, we will actually drive bad behaviors, because people will do whatever they need to do to achieve that goal. If our goal is to make the world a better place, or to produce the most innovative, amazing products, or to do the best service for our customers, then making money is a result of achieving our goals and not the goal. Metrics are important because we tend to do that which we're measured on. If we're not being measured in a company on certain things, we tend not to focus or think that those are important. The other side of metrics, though, is that we know how to game the system. And so if we just use metrics alone, then people will make believe and fill out what they need to do to say that we're hitting those metrics, but they won't actually necessarily be achieving the results of those metrics. And so that's where accountability comes in, because if we're not being held accountable, if there's not a consequence to our bad behavior, to gaming the metrics, then we tend not to do that. An example of this is there was a leader, a manager, who took over a call center, and she noticed that the close rates, how often they closed a call with a customer, solved the problem, were very low. It took a very long time. And so she said, we need to get our close call rates up by 50%. So that's what happened. The team started closing their calls, and the call rates went up. But very quickly, when they started doing post-call surveys, the customer sentiment went way, way, way down. Because what the people were doing was, at the end of a call, regardless if the problem was solved or not, they would close the call. And then nobody would know to get back to the customer as a follow-up. Because she made the metric as closing calls, not closing calls and customer satisfaction. And so the accountability is important. Communication. So especially in larger companies where we have large audience, we have people from different geographies, different cultures, we have to understand that not one communication plan will effectively work to get all of the information we want out. So we've got to learn how to cascade communications by the different grades, by the senior VPs, directors, managers, and individual contributors in the different countries, in the different cultures. We need to understand that heroes that work in Mexico might not work in the United States or might not work in Japan. And so we have to understand that we create these things for the cultures that we want them to grow in. And therefore, managers, a lot of times I manage people from multiple cultures at the same time, and I need to understand that so that I make that effective. Mediums. Some of us like to receive our information on watching videos. Some of us like to read. Some of us like to have podcasts. And so there's lots of different mediums upon which a company can communicate out to its employees. It's important to utilize as many of those mediums. How do you know which mediums the company wants, the employees want? That's by doing and understanding what is the impact of your current communications. And it happens again by testing the sentiment, by going out and asking the employees, are these communications that we're using effective? Are they helping you or not? Then the expectations of the leaders, and I couldn't make this slide nicer. I tried, I played with it, I tried to make it nicer. There's really three elements that go into setting expectations. One is around performance, about how you do your job. And so making sure that there's a way of giving conscious, positively intent feedback, understanding the impact that I'm having on my team, on the work that I'm doing, and how am I growing my development. As a person, that I feel comfortable with myself as bringing my whole self to work. That's the idiosyncratic piece. Can I be myself? And will I be respected for that? What is my intent? And to always have positive intent, to take ownership and not blame others for my successes or my failures, but to take ownership over what I do and share that, and to be aware that I am always having an influence and what my influence is. And then, of course, the idea of how to ensure that there's engagement, employee engagement, that I like to do what I do. And that requires me to feel that there's a purpose in what I'm doing, that I have the ability to grow and get smarter and learn more, and that I have some choice in how I do my work. Then lastly, well, not lastly, second to last, is about the compensation. And we've really talked about this, that if we don't ensure that the way we reward, the way we promote, the way we fire is aligned to those values, that we set our cultural values, then nobody will believe in them and nobody will trust them. And lastly, it's about reinforcement, role modeling, ensuring that everyone's behaviors, especially senior leadership, are doing what they need to do. And that if we don't do them, that there's consequences to it. And that we're always listening to understand what is the pulse of our employees. Now, we have to understand that sometimes it's more important to understand what we shouldn't do as much as it is important to understand what we should do to make a conscious culture. The first is not to oversimplify the culture, to make sure that our behaviors are consistent and that they are not incoherent from each other. Incoherent is where I say one thing and I do another. It's part of inconsistency, but it's where I value two things that don't work together. Lack of follow through and impatience is where I don't complete what I say. I don't do what I say, and I don't say what I'm going to do. The resistance piece is where I make believe that there isn't resistance and I don't address it, and accountability. If I want a conscious culture to work in my company, I have to have executive sponsorship. I have to understand that it's a change event, and I need to have people who are dedicated to making a change plan and seeing that change through. I need to understand the employee sentiment, and I need to make sure that I have metrics that are meaningful. I'm going a little bit over, so I'm going to catch up quickly. One last thing that I want to say about conscious culture. We are focused a lot on diversity, and sometimes we take diversity to mean different things. And so what I mean by diversity is that we do and act with respect towards each individual. Not that I only want diversity if it's in my group, if everybody agrees with my version of diversity. But diversity in a conscious culture is where we have thoughts, different personalities, different religions, race, color, and we respect the individuals who are in them, and not them because they're part of a group. If we don't feel comfortable to bring our whole selves to work, to be able to be creative and innovative, we will never have a conscious culture. So thank you very much for your time. And any questions, Clever?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation, Yosi. We have some questions. We also have a limited time. So before we go to the Q&A, I just want to apologize to the audience. We have some minor issues while you're streaming. I just want to communicate that the conference are being recorded at the source. So we will be sharing better quality video at the end with all the attendees. So let's take up with the questions. We have here one. Are the 3 states of the company culture really so obvious or clear?
So the answer is no, not usually, but you can use those indicators that I had on those 3 slides. Normally it's somewhere in between a lot of the different states. The idea, once again, is really just to understand where I am to know where I want to go. So it's not that it's black and white. It's not, so obviously clear. It's really about knowing, getting a sense of where I am so that I can plan to the direction I want to go.
Yeah, nice. We also have one here. So how long can it take to successfully implement a conscious culture?
It can take a long time. It really depends on the size of the company. The larger the companies, the longer it takes, mostly because of the communication plan, but also understanding employee sentiment can take some time. The idea is not to rush it, but to take the time to understand where people are at, what they value, and then making sure that you communicate it out. And it's really a buildup, because it's not, we talked earlier in the mid questions, there's no perfect system.
Okay.
So the idea of starting down that path is the important part.
So that's good to know. It takes some time, right? Yeah. So we have another one. Have you really seen a conscious culture in action? Right, that's great, huh? So what different did you really experience? What was your experience with this culture?
So I'll tell you, the biggest experience was that Monday morning feeling that I looked forward to going to work. That's the biggest difference. The second is that in a conscious culture company, you often get to really grow your experience and start to do lots of different things and feel that this is a rewarding experience for you.
Yeah, that's really great. You just wake up and want to go to that environment,
right?
Yeah. So this is a question that we always see when we are tackling transformations. How many people does it take in a company to create a conscious culture?
So it really depends on the size of the company. In smaller companies, one person, a senior person, can lead it. Ultimately, it takes everybody to really keep a conscious culture going. When you have bad behavior that's allowed to stay, it will sabotage the culture. But to get it going, it starts off with one person. In that company that I was starting off in the stories in the beginning, it started off with Allie. She was the one person in a company of 4,000 people that started the whole trend of the conscious culture because of how she treated her team.
Yeah, that's good. So I think that people who saw your conference today, it was really impacted by the subject. So where can they go to learn more about this?
So I'll tell you, there's a lot of information on Google sites. Search for conscious culture. You will find there's a lot of different people who have written about it. And always feel free to reach out to me, and I can help you give it more direction. You can contact me on LinkedIn. You'll get the slides, which has my email address on it, and I'm happy to continue that conversation with you.
So, thank you so much, Yosi. For sure,
thank you, Kleber.
I will get in contact to know more. It's a topic that it really interests me. Thank you for joining us today. So, again, sorry for the minor issues that we have. And thank you. Bye-bye. Ahora en Spanish. Gracias a todos por haberem estado con nosotros a escuchar este tema súper importante sobre cómo cambiar la cultura de la empresa de una manera consciente, cómo ir hasta una cultura consciente de la organización. Yosi está available en LinkedIn, ustedes pueden contactar con él. Esta presentación será compartida en la área de documentos de la plataforma. Y también posteriormente les vamos a enviar las grabaciones. Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo y quédate ahí para ver el panel que sigue con unos capos de la transformación. Cómo empezamos una transformación y medimos el valor que aporta.